when it comes to whether or not employees should head back to the office, many companies are between a rock and a hard place. A slew of factors continue to complicate an industry's attempt to create a steady formula for work. Whether it be vaccine and mask mandates, mixed messages from government agencies about health and safety, or a worker's personal lifestyle. That's why experts are saying that working from home is here to stay, and more companies need to be willing to accept it. While the pandemic has shown that it's possible for companies to turn a profit with employees out of the office, some managers argue that their workers are missing out on valuable skills that they can only obtain in person. So how does a company wager which method of working is best for everyone involved? And what does this mean for the future American workforce? Dr. Laura Morgan Roberts joins me now to help answer these questions and more. She is an organizational psychologist and professor of practice at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. Good evening to you, and thank you for being here. Now, when the pandemic first started, most industries switched to remote work if it was actually possible to do so. But as more variants pop up and other factors such as health issues and parenting complicate a person's ability to head into the office, it doesn't seem like we'll ever have a quote unquote return to normal. Is this the new normal?
Thank you so much for having me, Aisha, and for engaging in this important conversation. You are spot on. This is the new normal. We cannot unsee the things that we have seen in the past 2 years. And by that, I mean the grand experiment with remote work. We tried it, and many of us found out that we were able to continue to be engaged, to deliver, and many corporations had record returns over the past 18 months.
How are companies actually remodeling their work structure to accommodate this new normal?
Well, there's I think the intentionality. So some companies are still approaching remote work in a piecemeal fashion, and they don't really have a plan, a design, or a set of coordinated efforts. Other companies who are doing this well really paused, took stock, and are starting to design a work remote schedule that aligns with their needs and the different jobs that have to be performed. So, does everybody need to come in every day? And if so, why? If most people don't actually. So, what are our hybrid work arrangements? How often do we need people to be in the office? How are we going to use various technology and communication challenges to make sure that we remain coordinated in our efforts as we move forward?
I remember before COVID, in the time before, I think we're all going to forget what life was like in the time
Yeah.
before, that companies were playing with this a little bit. You had some of the innovative kind of tech companies that were thinking about, going to hybrid work or remote work. But then I remember a bit of a backlash when many corporate executives actually started to make a big stink against remote or hybrid work, with the assumption that it was actually making employees lazy, or that they weren't working as hard as they did when they were in the office. But for the average worker, heading back to the office is a lot more complicated than that. Bloomberg just reported about the growing disconnect between workers and managers, with many workers showing a lack of trust for their companies. So why might that be? And where is this disconnect coming from?
Well, for so long, we expected that our workers would check their identities at the door when they stepped into the office. So, don't take the personal phone calls, don't handle your personal tasks, walk into the workplace, focus on work, and then you can handle your other business when you're on lunchtime or when you leave work, or on the weekends, right? Well, the pandemic required us not just to check our identities at the door of work, but instead to invite our whole workplace into our home. At the same time, our family systems and structures were profoundly disrupted. So you have a lot of working parents who have multiple competing demands taking place during 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So they need more flexibility. They need more flexibility to be able to work simultaneously on their projects and assignments that are parts of their professional or work responsibilities if they're able to have remote work arrangements. But then also coordinate some of the other aspects of life and caregiving that the pandemic has brought on. So managers need to rethink some of their assumptions about the kind of access and immersed focus and engagement that their workers are going to have from 9 to 5, and accept the fact that most individuals are engaging in some form of multitasking throughout the day. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that you should start to micromanage your workers even more to try to make sure that you know that they're focusing on their job and that they're not wasting company time or company resources. Trust is the key factor here, as you mentioned, Aisha. And that's what's quite fragile right now. Many workers are disappointed with the amount of compassion, consideration, and trust that their employers granted them during the hardship of the past 2 years. And now their employers are hearing about it. They're seeing their workers less
Mm-hmm.
engaged in their work, actively searching for other jobs.
You just said a word, and what you are getting at is a lot of what we've been talking about this on this show, which is the power struggle that we see playing out now between employers and employees. And like you said, there was a time, frankly, of yesteryear when employers thought that they were the boss of you. The reality is, though, is that over the last year, we've seen that workers are fighting back. They're fighting back about the best method to work in. And we've also seen this great resignation where people are like, we ain't even coming back to work because it doesn't suit us. So talk to us about the power. Who has the power now, the employee or the employer?
Oh, the power over what, right? The employer still signs the paycheck, but the employee has the power of choice. The employee has always had the power of choice, but the employee hasn't always exercised that power. And we're seeing now that employees are putting their work life in the perspective of their broader life. Many of them have lost family and friends who are very close to them. Many of them have learned how to live with less and how to focus their time and effort on what they think is most meaningful and will have a lasting impact on their quality of life. That might be your job. That might be your relationship with your coworkers or managers, but for far too few workers, it's not. And so now
Mm,
employers, whether it's Dollar General, McDonald's, a hospital ward, K-12 education setting, investment bankers, all
mm-hmm.
full range of occupations, frontline and office tower occupations are hearing the same message from their workers and their employees. Number one,
Mm.
we want dignity and respect. Number two, we want flexibility. And number three, we want healthy boundaries.
I got to tell you, I wonder if this is the resurgence of the labor movement right now that we're seeing. Very quickly, in the time I have left, I think in about 30 seconds or so, comment on how race plays a role in this. I saw a Slack survey that showed that 97% of black employees actually see a future for fully remote or hybrid work, while only 3% of them actually want to go back to the office.
I'm so glad you asked that question, Aisha. The three factors we just mentioned, the dignity and respect, the flexibility, and healthy boundaries, are three things that Black and African descended workers have been seeking for centuries on the US soil in
Mm,
particular. Um, so, here where there are more options for remote work, you're going to see more Black and Brown workers exercising that freedom of choice, finding work arrangements, careers, perhaps entrepreneurial ventures that afford them that dignity and respect, that grant them the flexibility they need to be supportive, care for themselves, care for their families, care for their communities, and to also establish some healthy boundaries that protect them from the microaggressions and the macroaggressions, the
mm,
bias,
mm-hmm.
discrimination, that they've had to face for far too long when it comes to work.
Dr. Laura Morgan Roberts, thank you so much for coming and preaching on Amplified. We appreciate having your insights. Thank you.